All right, it's finally time, the moment that I know you've been waiting for on pins and needles. We're going to jump into our weekly review here. And I did want to reiterate here something I said at the beginning of the section. I just firmly believe that this is the absolute bedrock of this outliner productivity method. It's the number one reason why I think this method has worked so well for me for the last couple of years. And I just cannot speak highly enough of what this process has done for me. Having some ritualistic time to sit down every single week and review my planner and start fresh has been incredibly powerful. So I'm really excited to share the weekly review with you. Before we jump into actually going through the process of how I do it, I did want to spend a little bit of time just talking in theory about why I think it's so important and drilling into that a little bit more. So number one, it promotes meta work. Again, I mentioned this is a term I stole from Tiago Forte. He calls it the work of planning the work. And I really love that framing. I think it's so critical. The natural inclination or the gravity pulls most of us into just diving into work and just constantly doing work and putting our nose down and trying to get things done. And this idea of having some protected time, this weekly review takes me about 30 to 60 minutes a week to zoom out and look at my work from a completely different perspective. I think is probably the single most leveraged chunk of time that I use throughout the course of the whole week. It produces a ton of value. And so again, having this weekly review in place fosters this idea of meta work, which I think is hugely important. Number two, it introduces a concept called disfluency. This is an idea I stole from Charles Duhigg in his book, Smarter, Faster, Better. And it's basically the idea of making information just a little bit harder to process actually boosts our retention of it. I've also heard this described in the Rome community as the idea of useful difficulty. So you're going to see as I go through this weekly review process, you may be thinking that there are ways that this could be done more efficiently. You might be able to automate some of this. And I actually have deliberately tried to stay away from making this process too automated. I enjoy the process of getting in there manually and creating my weekly planner from scratch every single week because that disfluency forces me to wrestle with the information and helps me really retain and internalize what are the most important things that I need to be focusing on. More tactically speaking, the weekly review prevents task rot. I'm sure we've all experienced this. Anyone who's done any level of work with productivity apps or systems out there knows that the death of any productivity system is neglect and tasks going in and then never getting touched again. And eventually the productivity system is just so full of cruft and outdated tasks and meaningless stuff that you just don't even want to go near it. And eventually you stop using it. So this weekly review really keeps things fresh. It forces you to go in there and work with those task entries every single week. And again, really keeps things from getting outdated. And then finally, it forces critical thinking. So this kind of ties in with the previous two bullets, but it's just the idea of as you're going through this weekly review process every single week, and if you find yourself kind of pulling tasks forward, they're not getting done week after week, you keep pulling it forward, it's really going to force you to pause and ask yourself, hey, like this has been on the last 4 weeks of my planner. It's still not done. Is this really something that I need to be working on? So this idea of forcing critical thinking and forcing you to really be clear with yourself about what are, in fact, the most important things that you're going to get done. So these are some of the core benefits of this weekly review process. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in and start building.